Hello and welcome to Salon Talks. I'm Andrew O'Hare, Executive Editor of Salon. This is a very special edition of Salon Talks. I would like to welcome to our show a living legend, the consumer advocate, lawyer, author, two-time presidential candidate, and author of two new books that we're going to talk about today, Ralph Nader. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Andrew.
Very grateful to have you here. Your new book is called To the Ramparts, How Bush and Obama Paved the Way for the Trump Presidency and Why It Isn't Too Late to Reverse Course. This is going on sale very soon, is that right?
Yes, it's on.
That's a whopper of a title. So it suggests that you think that both previous presidents paved the way for this calamity to befall America.
Yeah, it's both what, and includes Bill Clinton, it's both what these three presidents did and didn't do that Trump took advantage of. For example, Clinton and his personal peccadillos and his sexual relationships. And, well, there's Trump, right? That when the norms broke under Clinton and he was rewarded politically, Trump said, hey, I can do this thing. I can run for president. There used to be a time if someone was divorced, they wouldn't run for president. Then came along George W. Bush. Blast out everywhere, wars of aggression and special forces and drones and blowing up people all over the world, never mind international law, the Constitution, federal statute, Geneva Convention. Yeah, Trump said, you can do the same. And then trade, imagine, the Democrats abandoned the American worker on these corporate managed trade agreements like NAFTA. And who seized on it? Trump took away the trade issue and got a lot of blue-collar workers in their hollowed-out communities to support him. Those are just three. But the most incredible one is the tax. The Democrats never had a popular tax alternative. And so there was a vacuum. And so with his lies and his mischaracterizations, he pushes this tax bill through as if it's the greatest thing since iced tea, when it was a huge giveaway to the big corporations and the super rich. So that's an example of how they enabled them. But underneath it all, it's the people are not engaged. Citizens are not engaged.
I noticed that's been a theme of your entire career, and it's certainly a theme of this book. It's trying to get, you have this theory, I want to get back to some of the other questions, but you have this you call it the 1% theory, right? Explain that.
Yeah, well, when Occupy Wall Street was in the news, they talked about the 1% of the richest, most powerful, controlling the rest.
Of course.
99%. And it occurred to me in studying American history that it's never taken more than 1%, sometimes far less, of engaged people, a few hundred hours a year connected to one another all over the country, to change our country, as long as they represented or they could expand public opinion, right?
Right.
So you go all the way from the women's suffrage movement to the labor, populist, progressive movement, Medicare, Social Security, all of that, including the modern consumer environmental movement, civil rights movement. It never took more than 2 million people, at the most, just putting in as much time pushing their members of Congress and getting into the press, demonstrating marches, as an ordinary hobby takes. An ordinary American hobby.
So you're in other words, to break it down to two concrete examples, to take the civil rights movement and the movement that you were so involved in, consumer rights movement, those two things, 60s and 70s approximately, you're saying that it was a relatively small number of people who actually drove those issues forward.
Yes, and of course the civil rights movement was the most mass movement, never had more than 2 million people putting in, an average of 10 hours a week. Never. You need three ingredients. You need that 1% or less, determined, knowledgeable, and accurate. The second is they represent public opinion. There's a lot of left-right support for living wage, for full Medicare for all, for stopping corporate crime against medical patients, consumers, and rental tenants, and so on. And then the third thing is to take all of that energy and knowledge and say, well, who's going to make the decision? Congress. Right. Congress. You turn Congress around, only 535 men and women. They put their shoes on like you and I do, Andrew, right? People know their names, right? Yeah. It's not some big bureaucracy, but it's the most powerful branch of Congress. Turn Congress around, you turn the executive branch, you have a different kind of judges in the courts, and we're off to a new America.
That's at the same time an exciting prospect and a pretty ambitious one, given what appears to be the very broken and dysfunctional nature of our politics right now. There's a couple different pieces of this that I want to get to, but one of them is your insistence, and you've said this consistently over many years, that the divisions between left and right are not as important as people think.
That's right. Over 2,000 years, the ruling groups have a divide and rule. That's how they prevail. So they try to divide people on ethnicity, religion, class, geography, you name it. They're geniuses of it. And that's what gets all the media. So we have reproductive rights, school prayer, the flag, and so on. My point is that when you go down the abstraction ladder, as the semanticists have taught us, to where people live, work, and raise their family, a lot of this red, blue, conservative, liberal disappears because they're all human beings. They want safe schools, safe streets. They want clean water, clean air, clean food, health care, fair taxation, all of that, right? They want voice. And so I wrote this book, Unstoppable, the Emerging Left-Right Alliance, Dismantle.
It was a recent book, not the most recent.
2014. To dismantle the corporate state. And I had 24 areas of convergence. And they're not challengeable. The polls show it, common sense shows it. There's even a convergence now left-right, getting bills through state legislatures for criminal justice reform. The right wants to save money and fewer prisoners, and the left is a more humane, just. And by the way, they're teaching each other their priorities in terms of saving money and humanitarian purposes. And yet you can't get on the media on this. It's amazing. You can't get on NPR, PBS, never mind the commercial media. There's a certain repetitious focus, unbelievable repetition of the stories. And I talk to people in the press all the time. I've given them scoops all the time. And I say to them, it's interesting. Why do you have anniversaries of tragedies, but you don't have anniversaries of victories? So like they have an anniversary of a disaster or a natural storm or a war. Fair enough. Why don't they have a 50th anniversary of the auto safety law, which has saved 3.5 million lives? No, they didn't even mention it. So they demoralize the public after a while. I mean, even Amy Goodman, who I like her program very much, the first 15 minutes is called the War and Peace Report. And I said, Amy, where's the peace? There's now peace between Ethiopia and Eritrea.
Right.
But it's all who got slaughtered, who got destroyed, who got sunk. And it demoralizes people tremendously and sets them up for emotional provocations like Trump.
That's really interesting. I mean, you mentioned the maxim a couple times in your book, if it bleeds, it leads. News, push for news. But are you arguing in a sense that by focusing on the political dysfunction or polarization, the media is sort of entrenching it or making it worse or making people believe in it more?
Yeah, because what does demoralization of the citizenry mean? It means that most of them get cynical and withdraw. Now, some people get cynical and then they go forward, right?
Yeah.
But that's not the norm. The norm is, I'm not into politics. Pox on all your houses.
Right.
So we're likely to have in the November election 120 million people staying home who are eligible, 18 years and above. 120 million are basically saying, we're dropping out of democracy. So it is a devastating effect. And I'm not just saying, the press should report good news. There's a good news section now every Saturday on page 2 of the New York Times.
Yes,
of
course.
But it's not just good news. It's when the many triumph over the powerful few.
Right.
When power is held accountable, is replaced with justice. That's what is missing. And so we used to get in the 60s all kinds of coverage. We're putting out more reports. We are litigating more. We're putting out more books. It's like a blackout of the progressive civil community. I remember once on October 10th, October 2010, I picked up the Sunday New York Times. They had 2 pages entitled, "What will Ann Coulter's strategy be now that she's being challenged by the Tea Party people?" And then I went to another section. They had 3 pages and 23 pictures of Pamela, the Islamophobe. I forgot her name.
Pam Geller.
Yeah,
yes.
Pam Geller, right?
Yeah.
Hey, I've been around for a long time. Chomsky's been around. The late Howard Zinn. People who have transformed food and nutrition. Sidney Wolfe, who's transformed the safe drugs and gotten unsafe. Did they ever get it? Nothing. There's something sick about the priorities here.
And I suppose the obvious question is the cui bono question. Who is it who benefits from an environment in which people feel demoralized and feel that politics is permanently broken and nothing is possible?
Power abhors a vacuum. Who has the power?
I do want to make clear, since we just sort of said things that suggest the opposite, you're not arguing, and I think probably in fairness have never argued that the Democratic and Republican parties are the same or that the results are identical depending on which of them holds power. You are, however, saying that the current state of the Democratic Party has created a lot of these problems, right?
Very much so. First of all, they're getting more similar. We used to appeal to the Democrats in Congress and get good congressional hearings. When they took over in 2009, they weren't interested. We couldn't even get a hearing on the inner ghetto exploitation of poor people. Even though there were black chairmen of key committees, I had to go to Dennis Kucinich, a white chairman of a subcommittee with no legislative authority, to have the hearing. That's how bad it is, you see? Even when the minorities attune power, they become, just like the others, dialing for commercial campaign dollars and wanting safe seats and no primary challenges. But I always ask, what tools can we put in the hands of the people? Mm-hmm. First of all, they have the numbers, right? The corporations don't vote. They have the numbers, number one. Number two, they have the human interest stories. They have the evidence. Denied health insurance, died as a result, couldn't get diagnosed, treated in time, blocked out of an emergency room, etc. Number three, there are talented people all over the country. Every congressional district has lawyers, economists, skilled artisans, a community college or university. So there's knowledgeable people with computer retrievals and all that. Number four is the summons. We the people is the way the Constitution starts, right? Yeah. It doesn't start we the Congress, we the corporation. And people say, we are the sovereign, right?
Right.
Who says so?
That's the theory.
Constitution.
The Constitution
right?
says so,
So
yes.
you know how the members of Congress have these choreographed town meetings. Almost nobody shows up. Sometimes the staff is greater. The Tea Party showed up and raised havoc, even though they just had like 100 or 200 people in the auditorium. That's enough, in 2009. So I said, why don't we reverse the dynamics? Instead of the members of Congress asking people to come to their choreographed town meetings, why not have a formal summons from the people to the two senators and representatives saying, come here. You're coming to our town meeting at our public place of convenience on X date, and we're going to tell you what our agenda is. And it happens to have majoritarian support. It's full Medicare for all, free choice of doctor and hospital, more efficient, living wage, on and on.
How many of them would respond to such a summons?
All right, this is a good question, because there's so few people who show up. You don't need, say, what you needed in the 60s.
Right.
My best guess is if 500 to 600 people sign the petition behind the summons, which is on page 45 to 48, the draft. You can fill in the blanks with your issue. You want
this
to
is impressive. He knows where something is in his own book without looking.
Yeah, I mean, you can put whatever issues you want to discuss in here. But it's whereas Congress has refused to this, whereas Congress has blocked that, whereas Congress has done the bidding of Wall Street with your tax dollars, whereas Congress doesn't even require the bloated Pentagon budget to be unaudited, on and on. And now, therefore, and you tell them what you want. Okay, here's the secret. Based on my reconnaissance, if you have 500 to 600 people, they sign their name legibly, then they print their name, then they put their email or address, and they put their occupation. Lawyer, teacher, professor, mechanic, electrician, highway repair person. You see the effect that has, Andrew?
Right.
Than just scribbling on a petition? I mean, there's a skill to being, effective citizens.
A skill to being heard.
500 to 600 will bring the senators. 300 will bring the representatives. Especially if you have a PS and you say, member of Congress, you're our hired hands. If you don't think there's enough people here, we'll be very pleased to double it in the next 3 weeks.
It's a great idea.
And it's called in personam lobbying. See, the most powerful citizen lobbies in our country, like the NRA and AIPAC, They don't have mass demonstrations.
Right.
They don't mess around with that. Pickets, what they do is they focus on each member. Who's their lawyer? Who's their doctor? Who's their accountant? Who do they play golf with? Who's their staff? What are their weaknesses? What are their fears? 535 of them.
And
they give money.
Focus on the vulnerabilities of those people, the money that they want. Well, we discussed, before going on the air, we discussed our mutual friend Bill Curry, occasional Salon contributor and former White House counsel to Bill Clinton, I believe. And Bill has said and written specifically about that period in the 90s when the Democrats decided to start taking corporate donations and Wall Street cash as a turning point. Do you think he's right about that?
You're very right. It started in 1979 with Congressman Tony Coelho.
I remember him, yes.
Yeah, he became head of the House Campaign Cash Committee and the Representatives in California. And he said, look, why are we letting all these companies fund the Republicans, all these PACs? We can do the same. And that was the beginning of the end. You could see the decline of interest in consumer protection, labor protection, a lot of lip service on environment, but letting the coal industry do so much of what they want, or the nuclear industry, or the bailouts and the corporate welfare state, or going soft on corporate crime and keeping enforcement budgets down. Money really, everybody knows money has influence and it talks, but it's when you really spell it out, Andrew, that you see how insidious he is. They even offer these guys in Congress jobs. They say, whenever you retire or you don't make it in the next election, we're here for you. That has a tremendous contemporary event and impact on members of Congress. But take the election. It's coming up. They talk about a blue wave, right? The Democrats could blow it again. They blew it in 2010, 12, 14, 16 against the worst Republican Party Kafka could ever imagine. Cruel, vicious, ignorant, Wall Street indentured, war mongering, anti-labor, anti-woman, anti-consumer, anti-children. These are their votes in Congress, right? Why aren't the Democrats been landsliding them? They've lost the state legislatures, majority state governors, the House, Senate, the Supreme Court, and the executive branch, because they're still dialing for dollars. And that's the most important thing. That's when you say, how are you doing against the Republicans? Well, we've actually got more money in the kitty. We're doing very well. No. How are you doing in the race for a just America, right?
Right.
So here's a perfect example. They got about a month to make minimum wage elevation a big, authentic issue. And they almost did nothing in the Congress for the last 6 years. They put a bill in and forgot about it. Well, they're in the minority, okay? That doesn't mean they can't raise havoc in the Congress and throw the Republicans against the wall. There are a lot of Republican workers who are making, very low wages in Walmart and elsewhere. So I'm saying Nancy Pelosi, Senator Chuck Schumer, get a huge number of Democrats from Congress on the steps of the Capitol and pledge to the American people that they are going to get a minimum living wage of $15 an hour. And then put it in the ads instead of those insipid ads that get 15% to their loser political consultants. You see Bill Curry talk about the political consultants.
Yes, he's funny on that one.
And make it authentic. Get it into the debates while there's time, and then get out the vote based on that. 120 million people who aren't voting, a lot of them are making $8, $9, $10, $11 an hour. The same with health care. The same with protecting people from corporate predatory activities as consumers. And you see, I have this book, Breaking Through Power. It's easier than we think. It is easier than we think. I've given a lot of examples in it. It's just a little paperback. But you know what's hard? To convince people that it's easier than we think. That's the hardest thing. Even though you show, how do you think women got the right to vote? 1% of the women. How do you think civil rights? 1% or less of the people. How do you think we got auto safety? 1,000 people at the most in 1965 around the country. Engineers, homemakers who lost a child and so forth.
Well, I do want to, however, before we have to break, I do want to talk about the blue wave issue of this year. Do you see some of the signs of change within the Democratic Party. When you look at the effect that Bernie Sanders had in his campaign two years ago, when you look at Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who won the primary in my district up in the Bronx, and will presumably be in Congress running, she's 28 years old, took no corporate donations of any kind, ousted a 10-term incumbent. And we've had, it's not a lot of people, we've had a number of those across the country. You're certainly aware of that. And the Democrats are, to some extent, pushing for some version of single payer. A lot of them are. It has become a leading issue. Do you feel like this is the result of kind of what you've been pushing for and what you pushed for in 2000, for example?
And Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
Yes, it's an encouraging trend. They're called the insurgent progressives in Democratic primaries, and some of them have broken through, are going to go to Congress. However, there are not enough of them. Bernie Sanders made a great contribution. He showed you could raise $240 million in small contributions, averaging $27. You think the Democratic Party, entrenched in the Democratic National Committee, the old guard, would have learned that? They're still dialing for Goldman Sachs.
Right.
They're still dialing for Walmart. They're still dialing for Amazon. See, so in other words, the trend is better, but it's not going to break through in 2018, maybe 2020, which is, I think, going to have probably 18 Democrats running for the president.
How do you feel about Senator Elizabeth Warren? There's a lot of buzz about her right now as a possible presidential candidate.
Well, she could well be the front runner right now, but you're going to, if Bernie Sanders runs, they're going to split.
Yeah.
And someone will walk in who's more, quote, mainstream.
Isn't it better if just one of the two of them runs, just in political terms?
It is.
Yeah.
Or they both run together, flip a coin. One runs for president, one runs for vice president.
Yeah.
That'd be quite a combination.
You have been asked 100 times how you look back on the experience of 2000. You know very well that some people blame you to this day for the election of George W. Bush and for many things that followed. How do you look back on that experience from this distance?
Yeah, everybody but Al Gore, who knows that he lost for the following sine qua non reasons. He lost because they stole it from him in Florida and blocked 5-4 with Scalia Supreme Court from an ongoing Florida Supreme Court recount that would have come out in his favor. He also knows he lost his home state of Tennessee, which is really not often. He was a senator and a representative, right? And he lost for a lot of other reasons, that he didn't come out authentic during the debates. Everybody thought he was going to totally plow George W. Bush under. But each time he came out, you didn't know which, he was awkward. You didn't know which one was Al Gore. And in one debate, he and George Bush agreed over 23 times during the debate. I agree with it, right? So he didn't run a very good campaign. Now, I believe everyone has a right to run for election in this country. Okay, so I don't think any of my critics would keep me from doing that. So the real problem is that they're looking for scapegoats. The Green Party is an easy scapegoat because I got 97,000 votes, 537 before the recount separated Bush and Gore. But what they don't point out is that 300,000 Democrats in Florida voted for George W. Bush.
Right.
That the Secretary of State and Bush's brother, Jeb Bush, the governor, engaged in a lot of shenanigans, including disqualifying people whose names sounded like ex-felons, thousands of them, not just a crazy ballot. So there are a lot of sine qua nons. And so what I tell people is, you're giving the Green Party delusions of grandeur. They are responsible for the Electoral College, which selected, which put it in Florida, because, Gore won the popular vote nationwide.
Yes.
They're responsible for the 5-4 Scalia Supreme Court. They are responsible for 300,000 Democrats in Florida voting for George W. Bush. They are responsible for Tennessee. And how about sunspots? Why don't you add sunspots, right? The other calculated argument is, I gave the whole platform to the Democrats. I once went down to Florida before the election. I said, minimum wage, the big issue in Florida. There's even a referendum on the ballot. They wouldn't touch it. I would give them all these majoritarian issues. People want to see what they were. Go to votenader.org, the 2008 campaign. I've left it open. And look at the 19 issues, most of which are current today, and most of which have majoritarian support.
Wow, that's quite a finish. Ralph Nader, whose new book is To the Ramparts, How Bush and Obama Paved the Way for the Trump Presidency and Why It Isn't Too Late to Reverse Course. Ralph, it's been an honor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew.